Ready to crush the Caro-Kann? In this video, we'll explore the two knights variation, a sharp and aggressive line filled with traps. Let's dive in and learn how to punish the Caro-Kann the smart way. There is a small but important difference compared to the main line. In the main line, you play pawn to d4, but in the variation I recommend, you start with knight to f3. While both setups have similarities, placing this extra piece into play earlier opens up many interesting, tricky, and aggressive opportunities that we'll explore today. In fact, it's a very well-rounded system that keeps you prepared for almost anything black might do. In all of these lines, you'll find yourself with a strong attacking position. Now, the most common move by far is pawn captures on e4. Players unfamiliar with this system often push their pawn to d4 to drive your knight away, but that's actually a weaker option. Others will often bring their bishop out to g4 at this point. Let's start with the most common response. Black captures the pawn on e4. You recapture, and usually black plays knight to f6, the Capablanca variation, aiming for a quiet, equal position after a knight trade. Instead, play queen to e2. It defends your knight and sets traps. If black expects to recapture with the e-pawn after knight takes f6, they'll realize they can't. Your queen pins it. They're forced to recapture with the g-pawn, weakening their king side. If they try to support the knight with knight to d7, you have a sneaky tactic, knight to d6, a surprise checkmate thanks to the pinned pawn on e7. Now, of course, in most cases, your opponent won't fall for that early trap. But don't worry, we still have plenty of strong attacking ideas ahead. Typically, black will capture your knight on e4, and you recapture with the queen. At this point, black faces a small problem. It's not easy for them to develop their pieces actively. For example, your queen controls several key central squares, limiting their bishop. So, in most games, they will play knight to d7, preparing to bring the other knight to f6, which also comes with tempo by attacking your queen. To this, you calmly develop your bishop, and after knight to f6, I recommend simply dropping your queen back, which quietly sets a clever trap. It looks like a normal developing move, but if black responds with the most common idea, bishop to g4, trying to pin your knight, they fall right into it. They're planning to follow up with pawn to e6, completing their typical Caro-Kann structure. But here's the surprise. You play bishop captures on f7, a sharp tactical shot that completely breaks their position. And in most cases, it leads to a decisive advantage or even wins the game outright. It begins with a temporary bishop sacrifice, followed by a double attack that wins back the piece and even gains material. You're already a pawn up with their king exposed. One mistake, and it's checkmate. Some try knight to f6 or bishop to f5, copying the Caro-Kann, but in the two knights variation, it often fails. You play knight to g3, then push pawn to h4 to trap the bishop. Black usually responds with h6 to give it space, then comes knight to e5, threatening the bishop again. Trading opens their king, so they retreat. Now you strike with queen to h5, threatening mate on f7. And if they slip, it's over. However, it's not easy for black to defend against this threat, because what can they really do? In most cases, they resort to the awkward-looking move pawn to g6. If instead they try queen to d5, hoping to counterattack or trade queens, it actually turns out to be a losing blunder. You respond with bishop to c4, adding even more firepower to the attack. At that point, black is completely defenseless. Either they get checkmated or lose a significant amount of material. So, let's go back. In most games, they play pawn to g6, which technically covers the f7 square. But now their bishop on h7 becomes completely passive and out of play. Now you strike with another powerful idea. Instead of moving your queen out of danger, you play bishop to c4, an unexpected and beautiful move. You're daring black to capture your queen, because if they do, you deliver bishop takes on f7, leading straight to checkmate. Even if black notices the danger and avoids taking your queen, you calmly bring it back to e2. Not only is your queen now placed safely and actively, but thanks to that brilliant in-between move, your bishop on c4 is also developed to a powerful square, further strengthening your attacking position. Now, here's another major advantage of this system. Almost any normal-looking move by black can lose the game on the spot. If they play any casual developing move, bringing out a minor piece without thinking, it often fails to the same tactical idea. Knight captures on f7. Just take a look. You have multiple pieces aiming toward the f7 square, and this tactical idea completely collapses black's position. Knight takes on f7 not only blows up their defenses, but also attacks the queen and the rook simultaneously. They're forced to recapture. And now comes the knockout. Queen captures on e6, delivering check. Thanks to your bishop's perfect positioning, you can follow up with a quick and clean checkmate. What I really like about this system is that you're not relying on one single trap. Instead, the entire setup is filled with multiple tactical opportunities. Your opponent is very likely to fall into at least one of them, and even if they manage to avoid the traps, you still get a solid, active position with great attacking chances. Alright, so far, we've covered knight to f6 and bishop to f5. Now let's look at another typical Caro-Kann move, knight to d7. In this line, black prepares to develop their knight to f6, intending to recapture with the knight from d7 if you trade. That's how they often calculate the position. They expect to neutralize your pressure by keeping solid control of the center. But once again, we have something special prepared. As always, you bring your bishop to c4, placing it on a very active diagonal. After black plays knight to f6, you don't rush to capture. That would only make their life easier. Instead, you go for the powerful move, knight to g5, immediately threatening checkmate on f7. Now black is forced to defend. But then you calmly play queen to e2, and this is a familiar attacking pattern we've seen in previous variations. You now have several pieces, the queen, the bishop, and the knight, all aiming at f7 and e6. If black plays any casual or standard defensive move, like bishop to e7, or even worse, pawn to h6, you go for the classic idea. Sacrifice the knight on f7. After king captures, you follow with queen captures on e6, delivering a deadly check. And if the king retreats, you finish with queen to f7, delivering a clean and unstoppable checkmate. On the next move, thanks to our bishop supporting the queen, the king has no choice but to step forward. But of course, it's easy for you to finish the game right after that with queen to f7, and sometimes even with a stylish final move like pawn to d3, delivering a fancy checkmate. Now, you might be thinking, it can't really be that bad for black, right? There must be a way for them to just play a normal game. And you'd be correct, but only if black plays very carefully. As mentioned earlier, they can't casually bring their bishop out, or play pawn to h6, because those moves leave f7 too vulnerable. To truly defend against your threats, black must play knight to b6. This does two things. It opens up the bishop, which now helps guard the pawn on e6, and it also places some pressure on your bishop on c4, though your bishop is already defended, so it's not a major concern. So how do you continue your attack from here? You take advantage of the fact that the knight on d7 is no longer defending, and you can immediately jump into knight to e5. Right now, there's no way for black to guard the f7 square effectively, and if they allow you to capture there, forking the queen and the rook, their position will completely collapse. They must now find the only defensive idea that minimizes the damage, one that concedes a pawn but avoids immediate disaster. Otherwise, they'll crumble under the pressure of your coordinated attack. If black is careful and smart enough, they may find the correct defensive sequence. Knight captures on c4. After you recapture, their best move is queen to d5, aiming to trade queens. Since your knight is under attack, you're forced to exchange. If they manage to find this resourceful idea, they stay in the game and avoid an immediate loss. However, even in this case, you've already gained a pawn, and you're threatening the rook, so you still enter a favorable endgame. After something like rook to g8, the simplest continuation is to move your knight to safety to ensure it's not trapped. And now you're left with a clearly better endgame. You're up a pawn, thanks to capturing on f7, and on top of that, black can't castle kingside anymore because their rook has already moved. So even with best defense, you remain in control, with both material and positional advantage.